Hi, everyone. Welcome to L3 Philosophy. My name is Emmy, and on this podcast, we talk about tools and strategies and stories to help you L3, which is love yourself, love your relationships, and love your life. And so today, I have an expert guest here to talk to us today about storytelling and the impact that it can have on helping you heal, grow, transform, and get through life's challenges and transitions. So, with me today, I have Amanda Hirsch, and she is obsessed with stories and the ones that we tell and why we tell them. She has a storytelling company called Mighty Forces, and she is fueled by the desire to solve problems, tell the truth, and help people feel like they belong. She is the author of two books, Improvising Adulthood, What I Wish Someone Had Told Me, and Feeling My Way, Finding Motherhood Without Losing Myself. So, Amanda, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Emmy.
Okay, so I too am obsessed with story. I think that they can be so helpful and impactful on our own paths and journeys with whatever we are dealing with when we hear someone else's story and also when we are able to share our own. And so I would love for us to start with just your take on why story.
Hmm. Well, I think we use stories to make sense of the world. So the stories that we tell ourselves are essentially the fabric of our reality. And in one of the books that you mentioned, Improvising Adulthood, um, I talk a lot about taking stock of our origin stories, the stories that we carry around kind of like invisible scripts.
Hmm.
We think that they contain rules we need to follow and norms we need to live up to, but more often than not, they reflect other people's expectations. And so one of the biggest messages I share in the book and that I talk about all the time is that we get to write our own stories. We can put down the scripts that we have ingested from our culture, our upbringing, media, what have you. And we can be very intentional in shaping the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are and our place in the world. And in so doing, shape our lives.
Hmm. That is in itself, having that awareness is so powerful because, as you said, we walk around with kind of this pre-programmed way of living and being and a reality.
Mhm.
But if we were to stop and think, wait a second, is this actually mine or is this something I absorbed from someone else or was straight out told from someone else? And I think one of the things that kind of hit me when you were explaining that was that when we can write our own story, we can also do so in real time. It's like we might not know where our story is going while we're writing it, but in that process, we find our way. So,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah. So, do
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
have any like personal experience with that in particular, or anyone that comes to mind that you've helped who has kind of had that experience?
You put that beautifully. And, again, it brings me back to improvising adulthood and the core message of that book, which is that life is an improv show. So to your point, when I say write your own story, tell your own story, I don't mean hunker down in your apartment and be like, all right, here's who I am. Here's what my whole life's about, and like get it right, one draft.
Yeah.
Um,
It was a
instead,
cold winter day.
exactly. Instead, like if only, I guess we could do that. But life is messier than that and juicier than that and more surprising and unpredictable than that. And so the way we often create the story of our lives is by improvising it, which means making one choice at a time. Um, and so the idea is to, really take stock of the stories you've been carrying around, try to let them go, or at least identify that they are not your stories, and then realize that you have the power to create your story one choice at a time. You make a choice. How'd that go? Does that feel like a yes in the core of my being? Great. I'm going to do more of that. Does that feel like a no? I'm going to back off from that. And of course, I make it sound, simpler than it is. We all know how hard it is to tune into when something is a yes for us or when something is a no. But if we know that that's what we're striving for, I think it helps. And so, in terms of a moment in my own life, I had a huge awakening in my own early adulthood. I had grown up as an overachieving, high achieving perfectionist. I got straight A's. I was thin and well put together. I wrote nice thank you notes, had great manners, and had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And so I got to college and all of a sudden, a lot of the scripts around achievement started to become apparent to me. And I started to question them for the first time. I started questioning the script, the story that going to college is about getting an education, because it seemed to me to be about getting a degree that got you a job, that got you a paycheck. And if that's what it was about, why weren't we saying that, right? So it was sort of like this existential crisis for a young person. And I ended up actually leaving school for a while. And I mean, it was devastating. I was very low. And I ended up going home from school in the middle of a semester because I literally got to the point where I was just walking down the street crying.
Mhm.
And a friend of mine was like, "You need to get on a train and go home." And so I did. And the breakthrough came when I came back later, and I was a new person. I Something had shifted in me, and now I was prepared to kind of do college on my own terms. And so I, instead of sort of sticking with the like seeking of gold stars narrative that had been with me for so many years, I had an English professor who assigned an essay, and I said, I could write the essay. I've written many essays. Could I write a play instead? And to her credit, yeah. And to her credit, she said, yeah. So I wrote a play. And I was like, wait, I just asked for what I wanted and it sounded better and I got it. And then I ended up doing an independent study where our professors had us identify like a core question and design a project that would answer that question. And my question was something along the lines of what would it take to help us really have a more meaningful college experience? And I ended up proposing a course um, where a writing centered course for freshmen, where we would reflect on what we wanted to get out of our college education and then get essentially some coaching around resources available to us that we might use to get that thing we said we wanted. So, you know, and a lot of the themes of my adult life came flooding in there, like intentionality, being entrepreneurial, seeing problems and wanting to solve them, taking pain points of my own and turning them into offerings for others. But more than anything, what I was internalizing was I get to shape my story. And in the end, the sort of happy ending to this story, well, the happy ending is I learned how to make choices for myself, and I've used that my whole life. But in the short term, I found out that I was being recognized as Phi Beta Kappa in that into my senior year. And at first, I was like, "Oh, that's nice. That's probably because I got such good grades." But it didn't like mean anything on a heart level. And then they told me that the reason that the committee or whatever had nominated me is because of the independent approach I took to my education. And that just lit me up. I felt it was like the most honored I'd ever felt. And here I am talking about it all these years later. But it was like the first time I was getting um, recognition for something that wasn't just sort of performing another person's script, but it was feeling my way into my own story and people seeing me. And I realized then, like, that's what I want. I that's what I want. And that's been my approach to life ever since.
There are so many things in what you shared that, we kind of, for time's sake, like just gloss over, but if you stop and think about how much courage that takes to make these kind of, huge life decisions, and they feel sometimes they can feel like the end of the world or just like the most massive weight on your shoulders. Like, who are you disappointing? Like,
Totally.
I think I think it's really, really important for everyone listening to like apply what you're saying to their own lives because I'm also thinking of it through the lens of other types of life transitions, like the ending of a relationship, or, if you're trying to start something new, like going into dating, it's like the story that you had, that most of us have here in, the US at least. Okay, what do you do when you go to college? Like there's very specific rules
Right.
that you follow. There's like you pick your major, you do this, you do this, you do this, you graduate. And so for you to actually have the courage to pump the brakes on that and choose something different, like college gets to look different for me. That in itself is so powerful because all of us have the power to do that with everything
Hmm.
that we're going through, but we just might not be aware of it. We might not think that we can. Like, been so many times in my life where I've seen someone else do something and I'm like, wait, you can do that? Right? It's just like going against the grain of what you've been conditioned to know as true. And so that kind of brings me to also your statement in your bio where you said like you help people like say the truth, right? And
Hmm.
you were trying to forge a path for yourself that felt more true.
Yes.
So how would you say, so, we've kind of been talking about story as like more of like a metaphor of like, your abstract narrative that you just like
Mhm.
keep in your head. And then there's also like the process of writing story, right?
Yes.
So would you say that you've used kind of both of those strategies to help kind of rewrite both metaphorically and actually?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. Um, yes. I pretty soon after college, I found my way to a copy of The Artist's Way. Um, and
It's like literally sitting right next to me right now. It's
we
like,
did not plan this.
we did not.
Um, no, but and a lot of the themes of that book are aligned with this conversation. And it so here's my journal, which is on my desk.
Oh, it's so pretty.
It got me writing morning pages,
Mm,
and morning pages, for anyone who doesn't know, it's what it sounds like. It's every morning you sit down and you fill 3 pages in a journal, and it's not meant to be eloquent, profound, intellectually stunning. It's just like get it out, whatever it is. So some mornings it might be very emotional. Other mornings you might, um, I mean, she's like, she being Julia Cameron, the author, is like, write your grocery list if that's all you can think of. Just like fill the pages. And the idea is to empty ourselves, so that we can then make space for more like creative inspiration to come in. All of which is to say, off and on through my whole adult life, I've done my morning pages. I've
mm,
journaled, and that is a way of literally writing your life, right? Like using literal writing to make sense of your life as it unfolds, to help you tune in to what feels like yes and what feels like no, so that you can then make those choices that are maybe against the grain because you know that that's what your yes is. Staying in touch with yourself. That's what journaling does for me. So also in my work with Mighty Forces, the work I do helping other people tell their stories, there is also bringing intentionality to how you show up in the world and the story you tell, for example, through your online presence about who you are, the work you do, and what you're up to in the world. And a lot of people talk about this topic in a kind of very flat, like personal brand way. And I hate the term personal brand. I think companies and products have brands, and I help companies sometimes develop their brands. Nothing against a brand, but I mean, it's literally gets its name from like stamping a brand on a cattle, right? So, none of that for people, please.
mhm,
We have stories, and they're more dynamic, and the power in deciding, wait, I want to take a pause and become more intentional about the story I'm telling about myself is yields both practical and intangible psychological benefits. So on a practical level, you're in writing your LinkedIn profile, the posts that you share each day on Instagram. You're again to like just bring back this sort of idea of there's like the more abstract concept of story and the literal practical craft of story. The literal end of it is you're letting people, you're shining a beacon so that people can find their way to you. If you're passionate about I don't know, pigeons, and you never talk about pigeons online, no one's going to know you're passionate about pigeons. And then when there's like some cool opportunity around pigeons, no one's going to think of you. But if you're talking about pigeons because you're like, you know what, that is really important to me, or on a more serious note, you know, lifting up women is important to me, or climate justice is important to me, or whatever it may be. If you don't show us and tell us that that is part of who you are, we won't know, and we can't then connect with you around that or find our way to you. And then you get more limited in how you get to express that interest or love or value in the world. So, but then also in helping people show up more intentionally and tell their stories online. Psychologically, the people I work with report a renewed sense of self, a
Mhm.
sense of, I was going into this job search and I felt pulled in a million directions. And then we did this story work and like, I sort of felt like, oh, I know who I am as I go into this process. I have identified the things that are, you know, the aspects of my identity that I treasure most, that I value most, that I want to honor most with this choice I'm about to make, this change I'm about to make. So I think there's often, in fact, always an interplay between those different levels of story, of abstract, of metaphor, of psychological benefit, right? And then in very practical terms, like it can help you get a job, it can help you get clients, it can help you write a better dating profile,
Mm,
you know,
mhm, mhm.
it can help with all sorts of very tangible, down to earth things as well.
Yeah, yeah, I love that you just gave the example of like writing a dating profile because there's, so many that just look like a resume checklist. It's like, I like this, and this. You should like this. It's like that's not engaging. Like I don't want to read that story. Um, Now, there were a few things that you mentioned that I wanted to touch upon because, of course, I can see the importance of how one would present themselves, as a professional, if you have a business or just in like the professional world in general. And for anyone who's listening who might not, really be in that setting or they're more focused on their personal life, I want to call to the attention that what you're writing and sharing online and is just as much of a storytelling process. Like you are telling the world about you, based on what you're writing and you're posting. And I wonder if there's a way that, we can be more intentional about it so that it serves us and supports us better.
Yeah,
For
absolutely.
example, one of the exercises that I walk my clients through is we craft a breakup story. Because what's the
Mm,
first, well, I mean, for people who have gone through a breakup, the first thing you have to do is people are going to ask you if they're used to seeing you with your partner. They're like, "Hey, how's so and so?" And you're going to tell them like, "Oh, we broke up," right? So what do you want that story to sound like? Do
hmm
you want it to sound like you're the victim, you are not empowered, you are in this horrible place. And like, I'm not saying to make up something that's not real and not honor your true emotions of what you're going through, but there is a way to still honor that while also shaping the story into one that actually feels expansive.
Yes,
One that actually feels like you have a doorway to walk forward through.
how it feels to tell your own story matters. So
Exactly. Exactly.
I think, I mean, listening to you, I thought of a couple of things. One is maybe before you get to that point, you have to write the really ugly cry version, just that no one else sees, right? We have to like allow ourselves space to be messy and all of that. And we have to get all that out before we can often get to the point that we can say something more coherent and more intentional. So,
Yeah.
and 1000% agree that part of the purpose of getting clear and being intentional about the story you're sharing is because you're speaking something into existence, right? I mean,
Yes.
the more times you say, I suck at relationships,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Like that's not probably setting you up psychologically to be ready to have the best relationship of your life. Whereas if you say, you know, the last few people I dated, I realized, this, and this, which helped me see that, you know, XYZ is really important to me. And
Mm.
that's really what I'm looking for next, or whatever.
Hmm.
Well,
Hmm.
that's so much more powerful to speak into existence than just like, well, I've ended 3 relationships in the past year. Like that sucks, you know? So, and then the other thing I would say about how you show up online and how that relates to attracting people. Um, a little exercise I do with my clients that I'll offer up here is I have people take stock of what are your pots of paint. So imagine you're an artist, and maybe if you are an artist, you don't have to imagine it. And you're trying to think like, what are the colors I'm going to use to paint the picture of myself online. And um, to figure them out, you might ask yourself, certainly, what are the obvious candidates, right? Like if you're an attorney, a human rights attorney or something, probably something about that shows up, right? Or if you're from Boston and you're obsessed with Boston, like there's just like obvious stuff. So get the obvious stuff out of the way. And then there are your values. What's important to you? And maybe what kinds of other people or organizations do you want to lift up as part of showing up online? Then there's your personality. Like you show up on a coffee date, what shows up with you, right? Like, are you always cracking jokes? Are you mentioning the latest podcast you heard? Um, so, sort of taking stock, taking inventory, and coming up with like 3 to 5 pots of paint. Other people might call them pillars or categories. And then those are like your tools for telling your story online because the problem or the challenge with profiles, whether it's a dating profile or a LinkedIn profile, is it's so static, right? And I think it can be stressful for a lot of people because they're like, well, I'm a this, but I'm also a that, and I like this, but if I say I'm this, then I guess I have to talk about that all the time, you
Mm.
know? And you start to feel boxed in. I had a client who was a physician and also a storyteller and a podcaster. And she felt so boxed in on Twitter because there was this community, Med Twitter, that had like its own norms. And she sort of felt like she had to perform Med Twitter every time she was, and coming up with pots of paint helped her realize, oh, these are all these other dimensions to me, and I can speak to all of them with my presence. Of
Mhm.
course, this was back when Twitter was Twitter and not X. But so anyway, I offer that up to people who are, inspired by this idea that how they express themselves and what they share online has a relationship to the people that they attract, and just an invitation to bring some intentionality and just keep a little post-it with like your 3 to 5. And then when you're like, I'm going to post something, and you feel like, oh God, what am I going to say today? Or I have nothing to say. Be like, oh yeah, Buddhism is really important to me. I'm going to share a Buddhist quote, or mystery novels are my favorite. Can't remember the last time I posted about one of those. And I really do think that there's an attractive power to that. We're looking for the people who are trying to find us. And if we don't show people who we are, they can't find us.
So true. I mean, even that example of like a Buddhist quote, let's say, that you post, right? S- Somebody who is not familiar with or not into Buddhism might just like scroll by, but
Right.
somebody who is going to be like, "Oh, I love that quote. That's from, whatever person." And that's when you spark a connection, right? And just like you're saying, you're attracting. So entrepreneurs, business owners pay thousands of dollars to be
Yes.
able to, express themselves in a way that attract their clients. But I love that you're framing it in a way of us as, just like our personal lives. We are constantly attracting in people who are either aligned with us or not based on what we are putting out there.
Yep.
So I love that piece about connection because
Hmm.
not only can it help you connect and attract the right people into your life, that when I say the right people, I mean like aligned people, people
Yeah.
who are just going to make you feel like you are thriving, you're enjoying life. Um, but you can also connect through story on a very, very different level, emotionally, with this resonance. Like if
Mm.
somebody just like resonates or gets what you are expressing, they're
Yeah.
much more likely to feel more connected to you, which is going to have a deeper, richer relationship. So,
Yeah.
do you want to share anything about maybe how I mean, you have really developed your craft in kind of like, making stories that are powerful, that stick. What role has this played kind of in your life
Mm.
for being able to connect with others?
Yeah. That's a great question. Well, I think I have been self-employed for 20 years. Next year, 20 years, only 19 currently. But uh,
Congratulations. That
thank
says
you.
something.
Yeah. And I have um continued to attract the best people as my clients. And that sounds kind of cliche or superficial, but I think I'm often sharing online and sort of it's in my DNA to be real. Like, so I don't have I mean, I'm sure, look, we all perform in some ways. I'm sure if you put me under a microscope, but point being, um, I share pretty darn authentically. And as a result, I attract people and I have these long relationships with clients. I mean, I'm currently working with a couple of people I've been working with since 2017 or 2018, doing storytelling work with them, and I adore them. I mean, they've definitely crossed the transom from just client to friend. Um, but these are just, these were people who found my smoke signals, who found little bread. I like to call them breadcrumbs. It's like breadcrumbs that you leave online that people can follow to find their way back to you. Um, so I have, there are so many people in my, what I would consider my community in a really holistic way, who I have connected with primarily online, and they found their way to me either because they saw content I had created or because through content I created, I had connected with a friend of theirs who then said, "You've got to meet my friend so and so," right? So
Mhm.
either way, it kind of traces back to the presence online. I mean, I was just out in LA and have a dear friend that I've made online who lives out just outside the city. And we just met in person for the first time. And for years, we've been having every other week like soul talks. Like, I love this woman and I just got to like hug her in person for the first time. So that's the biggest way I've experienced this. Um, but I wanted to mention too, when you were talking, I forget the turn of phrase you used, but you said something about like the power of story to connect us. And I wanted to sort of just tease out, I think if someone's feeling a lot of pressure about writing like a perfect dating profile, certainly you bring intentionality to it and you can write something very powerful. And obviously no one profile is going to say everything about, I mean, is going to like be you. I mean, it's a snapshot, but there's also like just to use the stereotype of like enjoys long walks on the beach,
Yeah.
right? It's one thing to say on your profile, I enjoy long walks on the beach. It's another thing if someone sees your Instagram post and it's pictures of like sea glass you found on the beach that morning. And you're like, just back from my morning walk, found all these great additions to my sea glass collection, can't wait to add them to the mosaic I'm working on out in my workshop or whatever, versus
Mm-hmm.
someone else whose long walk on the beach was like, so proud of myself. I clocked 15,000 steps this morning, getting ready for the such and such, the 5K next week or whatever it is. Those are two stories about long walks on the beach, but
Ah,
different people will respond to each story differently. So that points to the power of sort of showing versus telling, and it
mhm.
also points to the power of voice. Because even within that sea glass story, I could write that in a way that was like very sort of reverent and maybe spiritual. I could also write it in a way that was like kind of punk rock, you know? Um, so so sounding like you.
Mhm.
So it's, I guess my message would then be it's just not what you say, but how you say it, and allowing yourself, doing the hard work of allowing yourself to sound like you is a big part of this storytelling mix.
Love that. I mean, you're giving, and I love that we're also using this in the context of dating profiles because you're giving somebody um like context for I love long walks on the beach. Well, great,
Yes.
everyone does, but like I really like that different example of like how these two long walks really look very different because it shows you what each person values. Like this
Absolutely.
person, at this point in their life really values fitness. You know that their goals are that they're working towards, a marathon or a 5K or whatever. And the other person, their value is just like the free time that they get to spend on the beach collecting. And so it's telling such a deeper story without actually like saying out you know, I like to make mosaic art. Like you're
Right,
you're
exactly.
you're
Exactly.
you're showing that it's happening. So I actually would love for you to tell us. I was thinking about it earlier. I was like, "Oh, I'm excited to ask you this question of what makes a compelling or a good quote unquote story? Like what makes an engaging story that just invokes our curiosity, our intrigue to want to know more?"
I think telling the truth, nothing is more powerful than telling the truth. And that doesn't mean you have to bare your soul in everything you create. I mean, you can tell the truth about all kinds of different things. But and that comes back to where we started this whole conversation of like, are you telling your story or the version of someone else's version of the story? Are you performing what you think people want to hear?
Mm,
Um, I want to come back to what makes a compelling story, but as a quick sidebar on this, like performing versus telling the truth, there's a video of Michelle Obama on Instagram today. I don't know if you've seen it. It's going around, but
no.
she talks about a decision that she made um, and not to attend the inauguration, and how the right thing to do as the wife of a former president was to attend the inauguration, but it didn't feel true to her, and how she actually even like how hard it was to resist the pull of the should, but how much she knew that wasn't the right choice for her. And to me, that was just like a ripped from the headlines example of this idea of, are you living out your own true story, or are you performing someone else's version of what the story is supposed to look like?
Mm,
Um, anyway, compelling stories are true. There are details. So, details hook people's attention much more than generalities or really broad statements. So, saying 15,000 steps, training for the upcoming 5K here in Birmingham, Alabama, is different than got some good exercise on the beach this morning,
mm.
or got some good exercise. Um, it's going to help me get in shape the way I want, as opposed to, or with the beach glass saying like, gathered some things on the beach this morning versus, added to my collection of sea glass. There's just
Mm.
different, we all just live in this world with so much noise and so many stories coming at us all the time. And so to really break through and get someone's attention, if you're telling the truth and you're using detail, um, and part of that too is inviting yourself to use language that is as specific as possible and that really sounds like you. So maybe I guess like avoiding jargon, for example. Now I don't know what the jargon is that's common for a dating profile, but like on a LinkedIn profile, it would be like demonstrated experience, managing stakeholder engagement. I mean, you start falling asleep just saying it,
Right.
but if you actually rewrote that sentence the way you would actually say it, it's
Mm,
going to be so much more compelling. So I guess I would say, I mean, there's a lot you could study the art of storytelling for a decade, but some just sort of quick tips would be like tell the truth, share details, like make it as vivid, bring it to life, show don't tell, and notice when you're sort of sliding into a jargony way of saying something or a maybe the way you've heard it said before versus the way you would actually say it in a conversation with a friend.
hmm
Like, tell it that way.
hmm
And the other thing about telling the truth that I'll just mention quickly is that unfortunately, I think a trap people fall into, and I absolutely believe it would apply to dating as much as career, is that um, they present themselves the way they think the person hiring for the job would want them to present themselves, which is, no shade on that person. Like that's how many of us are taught, right? Like customize your resume and your cover letter, make it seem like this is your dream job or whatever, even if it really isn't. And the problem with that scenario, which again I can imagine is analogous with relationships, is um, you get yourself into a position where you just have to keep performing and
hmm
pretending.
hmm
Like if you're like, well, more people aren't gonna like me if I say I'm into Dungeons and Dragons, but you love Dungeons and Dragons, then what are you gonna do when you attract someone who thinks you just like long walks on the beach? Like, are you gonna like, hide out every Tuesday night when it's Dungeons and Dragons time? Like, you never get to actually relax and be yourself. So you don't want to like write yourself into a box or into a corner.
And that comes with the being truthful piece. It's like how open are you to bearing, who you are authentically? And I can confirm, yes, it super applies to dating and showing up as like, yes, exactly. I mean, that is exactly what a lot of people do on, going on dates is like you're so concerned about what the other person is going to think of you. Especially for people coming out of long marriages, which is a lot of the people that I work with have been in like 20, 30-year marriages, and now going back out into the dating world is just completely foreign and new and scary. And
Yeah.
so if you're thinking about going on a date with someone, first of all, you might be really anxious, but then it also might be a little bit exciting. And then so what's the very top thing on your mind? It's like, well, I want to make sure this person likes me. Right.
Right.
And so then to just, speaking to your point of like now you're in this realm where you're just trying to like watch their reactions and
Yeah.
just kind of like perform, and how much cooler would it be if, you got to just show up and be yourself and you either have a good time or you don't. Like that's information right there. And I love that your example of like, you're applying for this job. It's like, well, maybe it's not your dream job. Maybe it's not actually, if you have to like change yourself and perform so much, maybe it's actually not the job for you or that you want. Same as dating. Maybe it's not the person
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
the other thing before we move on is, you're talking about how these three components to storytelling can really help it be draw somebody in. And so some people might know that I wrote a memoir few years ago now, and it's about a spicy relationship I had and the tumultuous adventures I had in that. But the reason I'm bringing it up now is because, I could have chosen to write a how-to, book as a
Mhm.
breakup coach and, something that would be like, well, I'm gonna give this to my clients to follow and have, all these strategies and things. And I can do that, but I chose to write a personal story from the first person perspective that was super truthful, open, vulnerable, but in my own voice of playfulness and like, even stream of consciousness. And the reason I'm sharing this is because I was surprised actually
Mm.
how it felt to interact with someone who had read my book or listened to the audiobook versus someone who hadn't. It was like they were looking at me like I was their best friend, whereas
Mm.
I might not even known them. I'd be like, "Oh, hi, nice to
Mhm.
meet you." They'd be like, "I read your book," and they're like, like this, like, because they know all this stuff about me, and I'm just like, "Wow, how um special it is to create a connection with someone because they resonate with you so deeply."
Mhm.
Like that's how we create connection is
Mm.
that feeling that we're not alone in what we're going through. Like someone else gets it, right? And so there's just so much value in sharing, not oversharing, but sharing in a way that shows who you are while also inviting people to kind of like come on that ride with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've as people have been telling stories for thousands of years since we, sat around the fire with an oral storytelling
Mm,
tradition.
mhm.
Like there's in fact a book called Wired for Story, and it talks about how our brains are literally wired to respond powerfully to stories. So you sharing stories that illustrate some of the ideas that you share in your work with clients are much more like that's much more likely to really lodge in people's mind and stick with them than than the other version, than the how-to version. If it's how-to and it's not paired with stories that really embody that, it's just much less likely to impact people as powerfully. So I think it's really cool that you did that. And I've started to have that experience with my book, with Improvising Adulthood. I had a call with a prospective client, and I started a few times to say things, and then I stopped myself and I was like, but you know that because she had told me she had read my book and really liked
Ah,
it. So I would be like, well, I started my company because you know that story. I don't need to tell that story. So it's it's cool, and it can also be a little surprising at first when people
yeah. I
know all
know,
that.
right? People read your book and you're like, "Oh, that yeah, they know all this stuff about me." But so just to kind of make the things that we've been talking today a little more tangible as far as the theme of like I really want people to walk away with the awareness that story, whether you are speaking it, in your everyday life, whether you are writing it, sharing it in your posts on your profiles, whether you are using it professionally, whether you're actually writing, something down,
Yep.
it is a powerful tool to help you love and accept yourself, which then ripples out into the other two, right? So, how would you say, like, what is the most kind of important thing to remember, or if you have any tips or anything
Yeah.
around like how story can help us love and accept ourselves for who we are, for where we're at right now?
I think the simplest way to boil it down is to be intentional about the stories in your life,
Hmm.
is to pay attention to story, because that includes both, oh, I'm dating this kind of person because that's who my mom always thought I should date, not who I actually want to date. That's an old story. You observe it then as a story,
Hmm.
and then you can decide that's not the story for me. So even, taking stock of your inner stories and narratives. Um, and then equally bringing attention to the stories, not just in your head, but the stories that you're speaking into existence or that you're transmitting with the way that you show up online or in texts or what have you. Just bringing awareness to story in your life. What stories am I telling myself about what is and isn't possible? What stories am I perpetuating through the things that I express out into the world? The last part of that, or at least another part of that, is to pay attention to the stories that you're consuming and whether they're serving you, right? And that's a whole other topic, and I won't open that can of worms, but the theme is really notice, story
Mm.
and realize that you have the power to choose the stories that you tell yourself, that you tell other people, that you feed yourself, the power to choose. That's
Yeah, and the power to choose whether your stories are either supporting you or keeping you stuck, right?
absolutely.
Or even like pulling you backwards.
And in the spirit of improv, realizing that you kind of find it as you go, right? So I think there's a tendency, I described myself as like a recovering perfectionist, right? So I know in my early adulthood, when I was like really unhappy, I sort of thought if I sit down in my apartment and I like think about it hard enough, I'll crack the code, right? You have to live your way into these stories. So it's about throwing a little something out, trying something, making a choice, and just being able to know that's a choice. It's not like my only choice I'll ever make for the rest of my life. It's a choice. And then go, did I like that or did I not like that? I'm going to make another choice. So there's action as part of living your story, not just telling your story. And I would just encourage people not to try to understand the whole story or write the whole story all at once, but to realize that what is normal for a human being is for our stories to unfold and even change, which brings us back to just pay attention to them. Just pay attention. What story maybe served you last year and it isn't serving you anymore? What I start at this point to get a spidey sense because I've been so immersed in story for so long. I get a kind of spidey sense of like, this story I'm telling about the work I do and why I do it's starting to feel kind of tired.
Mm.
It's not lighting me up as much. And that becomes my clue of like, well, is there something in my work that's feeling tired that isn't lighting me up not as much? And then pull out the journal, and so yeah, attention, noticing story, I
Yeah.
think.
I think that's a great number one priority for everyone to start with, including, myself. Like even though I'm already aware that there's stories everywhere, I think it's great to reprioritize noticing them everywhere because they are. And I mean, even just thinking about like our everyday tasks that we do, right? Even like dressing yourself in the morning, you might have a story that says like I'm the kind of person who can wear this but can't wear
Mhm.
that.
Yeah,
Like maybe, based on what you think your body type should wear or, the kind of person you are, like the image that you, right? It's like,
yeah.
what if one morning I want to, well, this is an actual example like of me. Let's
You're
not
like,
pretend that
what
I'm like
if one
making it
morning?
up. Okay. It's like, someday I even like just these stories of everyday life. It's like you're always arguing with yourself in your head. Well, at least I am. And so
Yeah,
it's like one morning I might want to wake up and be like, I just want to be this like free spirit who's wearing feather earrings and just like walking around in like you know these big baggy pants. And my story will come up right away and be like, well, you really should look more professional, when you
mm,
show up for an interview. Like, you can't be walking around in, hippie clothes. And I don't mean that in like a derogatory way.
yeah.
And so it's just even so simple things of noticing, like, how are you pigeonholing yourself?
Well,
How are you
yeah.
putting yourself in a box? And how could you free yourself?
Yes, and freeing yourself can be one choice away. It can be, why am I putting on this blue blazer? I hate this blue blazer. I'm putting on, the peasant blouse or whatever it is. Or, I mean, I want to actually, what comes to my heart is a story about my daughter. She's 12, and a few weeks ago, she texted me and was like, I was feeling kind of anxious. And then I realized I don't have to feel this way. So I went outside to get some fresh air. Or, I mean, her words, that it wasn't exactly that, but that was the basic gist. And I was like, hot damn, like, good for you. But she changed her story, right? She
Yeah.
noticed the story she was telling herself of like, I'm worried and I'm having a bad day. And then she noticed, oh, wait, does that have to be the story? What if I remember that going outside and sitting and drawing under a tree often makes me happy. I think I'm going to choose that. And that, again, the improv metaphor comes back because you are a character acting things out one choice at a time. You aren't actually writing a script. I mean, you're
Hmm.
living it, you
Hmm.
know. Improv is kind of like the intersection of writing and acting, and directing. It's like
Yeah.
all of the things, right? And so I think that's a very hopeful message, in your everyday life. If you notice, gosh, until I listened to this, podcast, I never realized the stories I tell myself about what I can wear, or what's appropriate to wear. Instead of being like, well, I've wasted all these years with the blue blazer, right? Like, I'd go down that path. Or, and you could say, well, what do I want to wear today? Maybe I'm going to try something a little different. And then
Hmm.
you try it and you see how it feels. Boom, you've shifted the story. Maybe you end up feeling like I pushed it too far. That was not appropriate for work. Or maybe all day you're like, I felt so badass. And like, I actually did my work better because I
Yeah.
felt like I was feeling myself. Like, then you learned that. And it's all just a choice and a choice. I mean, we love to think that it's more than life is more than that, but it really isn't. I mean, there is no script. Like, it's not like somewhere we could flip ahead and see what happens next for us. I mean,
Mhm.
that's not a thing. We
Right.
make it. And of course, obviously, it doesn't mean we have full control over everything that happens in the world, but we control how we choose to respond over and over again. So, um,
Yeah. I love that example that you gave of your daughter because that's so powerful because we can get so stuck in especially an overwhelming feeling like anxiety, right? It's just like taking over to stop yourself in the moment and be like, wait, this is just a story. I'm telling myself I'm anxious, I'm fearful, I'm whatever, right? And it's perpetuating the
yes,
body response.
yes,
So for you to stop and be like, I actually don't have to feel anxious.
yeah,
Wow. That's
yeah.
just truly
Or
amazing.
yeah, or I like, I mean, I have clinical anxiety as well. The poor
Mhm.
child comes by it honestly. And maybe you're not gonna be able to just like turn off your anxiety. I mean, but you can remind yourself, in the past these things have helped when I have
Mhm.
felt this way, and they may shift how I'm feeling. So it's not like you're talking yourself out of a feeling, but it's more like, okay, well, I've been sitting here for 30 minutes and I feel pretty bad, you know? So, I'm remembering earlier in the week, I was really happy when I was, reading a book. I think I'll try reading a book and see if I mean, really, I mean, it sounds so basic, but and the other thing is that we're always making a choice, right?
Mhm.
So whether we think it or not, some people might be listening and thinking, well, God, that sounds exhausting, all those choices. And it can be, but the truth is you're making just as many choices. You're just maybe on autopilot, or, not as aware. But like, if you put on the blue blazer, that's a choice,
Mhm.
every time you do it. So again, it's the paying attention, the noticing, the bringing awareness.
Mhm.
And improv I like as a metaphor too, just because a word you've used a few times is playful. And it's playful. Like, it allows us to feel, life can feel so heavy, and it allows us to invoke a kind of playful energy. I talk in my book about, there's this game in improv called New Choice.
Mhm.
Have you played? Are you familiar?
Yes, actually, and I was gonna share with everyone that I did an L3 interview with your husband, Jordan, and our whole theme was how to be more fun and playful in life, and we did do the new choice game
Oh, okay.
on the
Yeah.
episode, which was so fun.
Love it.
So people can go and watch that episode because that's a great kind of life hack for making choices and everything in alignment, Amanda, with what you're sharing with us today. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Um, I have a friend who I tried that with her daughter not too long ago. And it just can help you get unstuck.
Mhm.
Like, okay, even get as silly as you want. What are five other ways you could respond to the situation? Okay, five more ways you could respond. And why not give yourself permission to say ludicrous things? Just, get it, it brings some spaciousness um to the
And fun, because then when you start being ludicrous, it just makes you laugh.
Absolutely. And
There
who
you go.
doesn't love to laugh?
Yeah, and it could unlock new stories for you, new narrative.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So,
exactly. That kind of bearing down energy I've referenced in, a few times of like sit in your apartment and like figure it all out. Like the opposite of that is like, oh, I could wear my dad's oldest, ugliest t-shirt to work today. Oh, I could, wrap myself in a garbage bag for work today. Like, how far can you get from like this like sort of unpleasant perseverating? The opposite of that, you opening that up and just being reminding yourself uh, that playfulness is possible. So
yes, yes, and you're opening yourself up to creativity, which I know you value as well. I would love for you to share with people how they can either get in touch with you or find you, because I also noticed that you have offerings on your website, one of which is I don't recall if it was called a creativity corner. That
yeah,
was create or creativity and connect. What was it?
yeah, creativity and connection. That actually is an offering for the people who've gone through my Artist Way group, speaking of
Oh,
the Artist Way. But
okay.
every Monday, I have a session at noon ET called Right Now. And it's about writing our way through the moment that we're all living in. And people come together online. Women, actually, the specific offering is just for women. My company in general is for all. But this particular offering is for women, and we gather and I sort of lead us through a bit of like a check-in ritual, setting in some intentions, and then I offer some prompts and people write for 30 minutes, and then we come back and check in with each other and sort of name what it is we're going to take with us into our day. And it's a really lovely and powerful way to start your week, whether you're, if you're on the West Coast, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. If you're on the East Coast, it's noon, but it's people have said it feels very powerful to set aside that time for themselves and to start the week that way. And also to the idea of what I was saying earlier with morning pages, you empty yourself. It's like you can kind of be fresh as you head into the week ahead. So that's an example of a way people could get involved. The best way to find me is to go to amandahirsch.com. You can find my books there, and you'll find a link to my company website, Mighty Forces. And Mighty Forces, you'll find all kinds of story related offerings, including right now, including story coaching, and ways we can work together. So yeah,
That's awesome. I love that you are not only helping people craft their stories, their daily life narratives, but also, creating communities, ways that people could connect through something as powerful as stories. So I know
thank,
I value that. I appreciate that you're doing that for other people. And I just thank you for sharing your experiences and your wisdom with us around story today.
thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Amazing. So, for everyone watching, I just want to remind you that I believe in you and I want to celebrate the gifts that you bring here to this world. And I hope that you'll tune in for our show next time. And remember to go watch Jordan and I's episode on fun and playfulness. I will link it in the description. See you next time.